All right, Musketeer Report podcast, October 17th, 2024. Paul Fritschner is back. Paul, this is kind of like the start of a new season of the podcast. We weren't sure. There's a lot going on your end. We'll talk about that. There's a lot going on in general, but we're back. We're going to do another full season. We're here, and this is kind of like the relaunch of a new season for us.
Yeah, it really does feel weird. It's great to be with you, Rick, because I think it's been since late May or early June since we've done a real true podcast together. I know we were there with Adam. That was a great show at Dana's. Thanks to everybody that came out and was there and listened. I thought we got some great feedback from that, but actually just sitting down I'm in a new house. I feel like I'm in a new spot. I mean, it's a new team. It's a whole different vibe here. So yeah, I'm excited to be back here and doing this with you.
Yeah, we are coming to you the day before Musketeer Madness, the night before Musketeer Madness, and just a few days here before the public exhibition at Dayton. So this is a good time to kind of give you some insight, talk a little bit about what's been going on in the preseason practices over the last 3+ weeks, and also preview what's to come. Because, I mean, really after this weekend, Paul, it's here. I mean, the season is just going to be right upon us. I know we still have a few more weeks until the actual games start, but it's going to go fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at, Sean was talking about it after practice the other day where he was saying like, hey, you have Friday, you have Musketeer Madness, then you have Dayton, then you go to Media Day. Then on next Saturday, you have the secret scrimmage up in South Bend against Notre Dame. And then you have a week off, not a week off from practice, but you're not competing against another team. And then boom, there it is. November 4th, you're throwing the ball up on that Monday night to get the real games and real season going. So yeah, it is right around the corner. It's great though. We love it.
Yep. All right, well, let's get into some of the things we want to talk about here tonight, and we'll start with the big news that's happened within the last week for Xavier's program, and that is the loss of Long Beach State center transfer Lassina Traore. And I guess just the biggest thing, I did a whole write-up, I'm sure you saw it at musketeerreport.com, kind of giving my thoughts on what the impact would be that he would have had on this team, what the impact would be now on the rest of the team that he's gone, and where Xavier's going to go from here. So I guess kind of to just start, obviously Sean said he was going to be the starting center, Paul. I mentioned in my write-up that I thought he was probably the type of guy that's going to be, 25-ish minutes per game. I don't know that he was going to average double figures in points, but like a guy that was finding ways to contribute on the offensive end, I would say, already within the system. And I think that was only going to get better, and definitely their best rebounder and defender in the post.
Yeah, I don't think that can be understated. I think Sean made a great statement on Twitter to convey the point that, hey, look, we know that none of you that are reading this statement have seen Lassina play basketball outside of a handful of the donors and people that were at the open practice when he actually got hurt. But we know that none of you have seen him play at Xavier. So I need you to understand how important he was to our team. And the importance of Lassina to this team, as you said so many times, was he was maybe the best energy guy on the team. He was physically in elite shape. He was competitive. He made everybody else around him better. And I asked John Hughley about that in his podcast that we had John on a couple of weeks ago. I said, what's it like for you to go up against Lassina Traore in practice every single day? And John spoke glowingly about him, said how much it makes him better. So not only does this hurt Xavier in the terms of being able to go out and compete against St. John's or Creighton or Villanova or anybody else, this hurt Xavier internally, just having that 10th player to go out there and practice and compete against John Hughley or Zach Fremantle or Jerome Hunter or whoever it is that's guarding him down in the post, depending on how they're matching up. This is a huge loss for this team. I think it does change the ceiling of this team. I think just by reading Sean's statement, getting the vibe from the coaching staff, you kind of can understand how important of a player he was. And I think, too, the biggest thing was how many strides, in my mind, he took from day one on June 3rd when they began practice until today. Right. I mean, he looked like somebody today who could go out there and really, really compete at a high level. And I would think if you're rationalizing this in your mind and you're trying to say, okay, maybe this isn't as bad as everybody is saying, you're saying to yourself, well, we didn't see him go out and compete against Big East players, right? We saw him compete last year against the Big West. We didn't see him compete against the Big East. But everything that you saw in practice told you that he was the best big man on the floor in terms of rebounding, in terms of defensive ability, athleticism, And he was also the only big man, as we've said a million times, who wasn't coming off an injury. He was healthy. He was ready to go. And it's just, it really is a crushing loss to this team.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is hard to understand for maybe some fans is certain guys are better than others at pushing themselves to the limit, going past the point of being tired or having a bad day in practice or, just other outside factors that are distracting you or bringing you down. Some guys are just better at ignoring all that stuff, blocking out and just playing with the most energy they possibly can every single day, every single play. He was one of those types of guys. And when you're paired with two guys who maybe haven't been those types of players their whole career, and Zach Freemantle and John Hughley, it's really beneficial for them to be paired against a guy like that because it exposes them, right? Like every single day when they're not at their best in terms of effort, we're not talking skill level here as much, right? Like this isn't, are they putting the ball in the basket or not on the offensive end? This is like, are you going as hard as you can when you're running the length of the floor? Are you going as hard as you can in a box out situation, fighting for a rebound? If you didn't do that against Lassina Traore, you got exposed in practice. And you can say like, well, I mean, come on, these are experienced guys, and Zach and John, like they're going to play hard. They want to compete. They don't want to waste these last years of their career. And that is true. But again, it goes back to the idea that certain guys, that's their skill. Like that's their strength, their superpower is that they can push themselves farther than others can. And I don't, for Zach and John, I don't think that's their skill. That's not their strength. For Lassina, it was. And that was a perfect compliment to those other two.
Yeah, we'll talk about this more here at the end of the show. But Josh, who's our video editor at the Sean Miller podcast, he came up to me at one point during practice today or yesterday, whenever it was. And he just came up and he was kind of shaking his head. And I could tell he was, frustrated or disappointed or something. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Man, I've just been logging all this practice footage and I just keep watching these clips of Lassina." And he goes, "Man, he was just so good." And, it's just one of those things where you're seeing that progression from day one to now. Like I said a minute ago, it's really hard now to try and figure out. We were talking about somebody that's playing 25 minutes a game. And I think, yes, he wasn't somebody that's going to go out and light it up offensively, but I think there were a couple of points in recent practices where you and I kind of looked at each other and maybe he made a move, a dribble move from the perimeter to get into the lane to score. There were a couple of times where he did some things where we thought to ourselves, "Oh, okay, well, maybe you do have something a little bit more offensively than originally we thought." But how you piece together those 20 to 25 minutes now it's gonna tell the story of the season. And I know college basketball is guard dominant, and this team still has an incredibly talented and complementary group of guards. And I'm really high on Marcus Foster, who I think is going to get a ton of minutes now. But it really is hard to put into words how good Lassina was and what he was going to bring to this team. I think it's more so what he was going to bring to this team more so than how good he was.
Yeah,
his piece was to this team. I'm not saying he was an All-American. What I'm saying is
a star in his role.
He was somebody that brought something to this team that nobody else does.
Yeah, and I want to be careful about that to some extent because, like, let's remember this kid is in theory coming back to Xavier next year, so he's going to have to live up to all these expectations that everyone's putting on him right now, saying he's out. Yeah. I do want to be careful because you've read, anyone who's listened to this podcast for the most part has probably read my coverage at this point, right? And I will tell you, if you read the stuff I wrote when he committed, it was not super glowing. It wasn't super high. I didn't think there was a lot of upside to bring. I thought he was like hey, if we need a few minutes per game to fill a guy to foul and rebound, this is our guy. And when I saw him, actually, he was much better than I was expecting. He was clearly the starter, and he was going to provide a lot. But I'd also say, he is limited offensively. I think there were reasons to believe, like there were times where he may have lost some minutes later in the season if Zach really got it going and they were better with a small ball lineup, or if John really got it going and they were better playing those two offensive bigs together more. I think that's a legitimate possibility that could have happened this year and could still happen next year, depending on where this goes. So I don't want to talk him up to be like, hey, Xavier lost the first team All Big East player, and that's what you should expect out of Lassina Traore next year, because that's unfair to him.
And I totally agree. And that's where I said a minute ago, like, it's not like you're losing an All-American here. Yeah. What you're losing is somebody that every single day since he's gotten hurt has showed up with a smile, has been there at practice, has been there at film, has been there wanting to be. He's just so desperate to be there, be around the team, be involved as much as he can. And I know you're only a week or so removed from the injury. I mean, we'll see as this goes on and he gets into rehab and everything else. But still, at the same time, it just is. It's brutal too, and just from the human element of it, listening to him on the Sean Miller podcast and being from a country where his family has such a hard time watching him play. His family's never seen him play basketball, much less the Wi-Fi to be able to get him to be able to see. He talked about that. He said, I'm really hoping this year, with the games being on Fox, that we can get a better connection over there so they can watch me play just back in the Ivory Coast. I mean, wanting to be able to provide for his family, play professionally, all of those things, just from a human element too. It's just, but again, he could come back next year and he could have a dynamic season for Xavier, and John Hughley comes back and you're talking about a pretty good starting place on a front court. So I don't want to talk about next year before we even tip the ball off this year, but it's at least something to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a big part of this story, right? And people want to know, like, what is the plan, especially in 2024, 2025, when, after the season, there's nothing keeping him here. He does not have to come back to Xavier. Now, from what we've heard, everything seems to be in place. Like, the expectation is that he wants to come back. He wants to redshirt this year, play out his last year of eligibility at Xavier next season. So plenty of time in between now and then for all that to play out. But that seems to be the case. And I would tell you, it's a very good sign that he's been at practice every day. Like you said, engaged, a big part of the team still. That's always a good sign when you have a guy sitting out and he's really bought in and still a part of the team, especially in this era of guys transferring year to year.
Yeah. So I guess the follow-up and the last point that we can talk about with this, Rick, is what do you think this does to the team's ceiling, their ability to achieve this year?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned the idea that you're probably going to see a lot more Marcus Foster now. And in general, I would say you're going to see more small ball, right? Because I think when you look at the lineups now, it's hard to imagine that you would start or spend a lot of time playing John Hughley and Zach Freemantle together. I'm not saying they'll never be in the game together, but it seems hard to play them at the same time a lot because they probably need to be staggered a bit more often if they're your two main centers. Now, maybe we'll get into this. We'll find out, like, Jerome Hunter's just really good at being an undersized center still, and that's what they're going to go with more often than not, but as their backup option. But I tend to believe you're going to want to stagger the two big guys, Freemantle and Hughley. So in that case, if you're going small more with Swain, Foster, and Hunter playing the 3 and 4 positions a lot, I don't think that's a bad thing for this team necessarily. In fact, I think there's a possibility that was going to be their best lineup at the end of the day, no matter what. Not to say Lassina Traore isn't a big loss still, but I think they might still have their best 5 lineup available to them, even without him. The question becomes, I think, and where you start talking about the upside is, to me, upside is how many teams can you match up with? Like, are there teams that the matchup is just going to cause you major problems? And without Lassina Traore, I feel like it opens up the door for more of those matchups. There are going to be more teams where, like, if they have an imposing front court, you're going to be a lot more worried about this Xavier team, especially if we're talking about postseason NCAA tournament caliber opponents. That's going to be tough for them to match up with if it's a team led by their front court and their center, I think.
Yeah, and then you get to the point where, foul wise, just think about that at the very surface level. John Hughley picks up 2 fouls before the under 12 timeout in the first half. You don't have Lassina Traore to go to, even if, let's say, by conference season, John Hughley had turned into your starting center because he's played in the Big 12, he's played in the ACC. He's kind of physically fits that sort of Big East center mold, right? And so by January, the middle part of January, maybe he's your starting center, and that's just what you go with. But you bring Lassina off the bench 5 minutes into the game, you don't have that anymore. You don't have that foul insurance anymore. You don't have that to be able to go to, and you don't really have the way that you're going to have to mix and match your lineups. You don't really have that balance, because Cam Fletcher really isn't going to play that role, even though physically, body wise, he might be that guy. He's not just going to play that role. I think he's a step behind everybody right now. So that's where I sort of get concerned on Lassina, where maybe he was the best player on the team. Maybe he was the first man off the bench by the time, like I said, the second week of January is here, but you don't have that. You don't have those extra 5 fouls a game now too.
Yeah, the biggest area where I'm certain that it impacts this team, like even in a worst case scenario, if Lassina Traore wasn't going to be the player everyone was hoping for, and it was just going to, he's kind of a role guy you can play off the bench for a few minutes here and there. The one thing that I know they could rely on him for is something we've talked about a lot since the end of last year, which is those moments where they couldn't get a defensive rebound and it was driving Sean Miller crazy, and he wanted to look to his bench and just say, someone get in there and get me a rebound.
Yeah.
He had that guy in Lassina Traore this year for certain. Now it's like, if you're under, like, yeah, Jerome can rebound a little bit. Yeah, Marcus Foster is going to be a great rebounder on the wing, but do you have that one guy with the requisite size to play center in the Big East and be like, I'm going to go in and get you defensive rebounds no matter what. We won't give up any more second chance points in this matchup. You lost that guy for certain.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we can move on from Lassina. I don't have anything more there.
Okay, yeah, let's talk a little. Well, actually, let me ask you one more question, because you brought up the tweet from Sean Miller, and I think that was kind of a unique tweet, certainly from a Xavier head coach, but just in head coaches in general. It was very, it really pointed out how big of a loss it was going to be losing Lassina. What do you think? Because I've had a couple people sort of ask me about that. Like, is he really trying to lower expectations, or is he like, what was the point of that tweet in your opinion?
No, I don't think he was trying to lower expectations at all. I think what it goes back to is the fact that Sean wanted to make it clear that he realizes that nobody has seen Lassina, and you're going into a season where last year you lose Jerome and Zach before the season, but everybody knew who Zach and Jerome were. Xavier fans knew what they were losing in Zach and Jerome. They didn't know what they were losing in Lassina. We knew, the four of us, you, me, Adam, and Shelby, who sit there every day and watch practice, we knew what they were losing. But the general Xavier fan, the general college basketball fan that didn't follow Long Beach State last year, doesn't know what Xavier's losing here. Sean wanted to make it clear that Xavier is losing a very impactful part of their team, somebody that they were counting on for whether he actually was at the jump circle at the start of the game or whether he played starter minutes, was going to play 20 to 25 minutes a game, and that Xavier fans need to understand that they're going to go back, they're going to go to the drawing board, and they're going to figure out, here's what we need to do to replace him. But that when the news comes out that he gets injured, it's not just going to be, oh, Xavier lost somebody that, well, we didn't really know much about that big man. He played in the Big West. He averaged a double-double, but how hard is it to do that in that conference? Man, maybe it's not that hard. Well, yeah, it is really hard because barely anybody does that, but so be it. We know that, but does everybody know that? Sean wanted to make it abundantly clear that this is the type of player we're losing, and it's going to take a lot to replace him, but it's obviously not impossible, and the first game hasn't even happened yet. So the season is not over before it started because Lassina got injured and had a season-ending injury. But this wasn't just your eighth or ninth person off the bench that would give you 8 minutes a game. This is somebody that was going to make a real impact.
All right, let's move on to preseason practice takeaways. We are past the midway point of preseason practices now. We talk all the time during this time of year how they get 30 practices during the 42 days leading up to the start of the season.
Can't get any back. They've practiced a lot, and you can't get any of them back, Rick.
That's right. So we're now into that, past that midway point, and really getting into the final few weeks here before the start of the season. And we'll talk about some individuals here later, but before we get into like actual naming guys and talking about who stands out, I just want your overall big picture thoughts. Like, is there a word or two or phrase or something that you can give us that sort of gives me your thoughts on what you've seen from practice so far?
Enjoyable. I'll go with enjoyable. If you're going with one word, I'll say enjoyable. I'll go with fun as a second word, because last year, if you're using one word, it's grueling. You knew that if Xavier didn't score within the first 7 seconds of the shot clock last year, it was going to be a long possession. We watch practice this year and we think to ourselves, oh man, there's 6-7 seconds left on the shot clock. It's all right. They're still going to find their way to get a quality shot. And the quality shot on last year's, if this was last year's team, what we're saying is a quality shot might not be a quality shot for last year's team, but you have so many guys on this year's team that are elite shot makers from long range that you're thinking, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good shot, and it's probably going to go in. So to me, just every single day going in there and watching them be creative offensively, the way they're able to score, the way they're able to shoot. It is so fun and eye-opening to watch how this team plays on the offensive side.
Yeah, it's funny because I would have used the term maybe like faster paced, and not necessarily just from the offensive meaning like you're talking about. I would just say even from drill to drill. I've mentioned this a few times, but going into the first week of practice this year, I almost had this like, oh, I forgot what this looks like moment, because last year things were so slow from drill to drill, and within drills it was like stoppages every few possessions because they got to explain something else. There's a new instructional thing where it's like, wait, do you not even understand what we're saying when we mention that? Hold on, like Lazar, come back out here. Like, do you not understand?
And it's not even like when you say don't understand, it's like literally a language barrier of do you understand what I'm saying? Word. It wasn't like sarcastic, like, do you understand? It was like, do you understand what I just said?
Yeah, and at the time, like, I thought they were navigating that pretty well, and I think they probably were. But then you see what it looks like with a bunch of guys who had been in college basketball programs. Even if they haven't been in Xavier's program, the guys on this year's team have, for the most part, all been in programs for 3, 4, 5 years. And it shows, like, just from drill to drill, it's much faster. Each drill is much smoother. The things that, like, when a coach says something, it's usually fixed pretty quickly and done correctly the very next time. It doesn't take them saying things over and over for a player to understand what they're trying to get into their head.
And the biggest thing for me to go along with that is you think back to last year and how much they had to piece this roster together at the end of the offseason, where you bring in Lazar, you bring in Gitas, you bring in Sasha, guys that at the time you were counting on for some major minutes and ended up playing some major minutes for Xavier. But you lost so much time over the summer to install a lot of those things and to get everybody on board and get on the same page. So not only are you dealing with the language barrier, not only are you dealing with inexperience, you're dealing with youth, you're all of those things. Now here this season, you start in the first week of June. You have one of the most experienced players by Division I minutes in the conference. You bring in, you don't have any freshmen on the team except for walk-on Henry Thole. You have such a gifted group of players and highly intelligent basketball players too. I don't think that can go understated. And I think the biggest way to really illustrate this, and I won't go into a specific, but there was something that they installed in practice. You know, it's October 17th this week or late last week that they installed in practice that I specifically remember they didn't install until the middle part of December last year. And it's a key part of what Xavier does. And that's not a knock on the coaching staff. That's just purely catching everybody up to where they are in the system. And that goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago, where you're able now here in October, before you've ever played anybody else that doesn't wear a Xavier jersey, to get on the same page, to say, here's what we're doing, and kind of run with it now over the course of the season.
All right, just two quick ones from both of us here. We won't go long on this, just a quick answer. 2 areas in which this team is most improved. You can go anywhere you want with it, but just give me 2.
All right. They are going to be a better defensive team. I know we just spent all of that time talking about Lassina and what he brought to the table. And I think even still, with him out of the picture, I do think that this is going to be a better defensive team than what you saw last year. And I know I'm probably stealing yours, and I know this is abundantly obvious, but it's just so clear. The shooting on this team and what they are able to do, Trey Green, Ryan Conwell, Dante Maddox, just to name a few, it's so impressive, Rick. It's really crazy.
I know I'm like totally putting you on the spot here, and I wouldn't like if you were doing this to me. So if you don't have a good answer off the top of your head, I completely understand. But last year they finished 45th in defensive efficiency, according to KenPom. You think they're better defensively? Like, do you have a number in mind that you would feel like sort of?
I mean, I don't see any reason why they can't finish in the like 30 to 35 range.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. That was just one of those things where it's like when you said defense, that caught my ear, because I was like, I wasn't expecting the first thing to be defense necessarily. So that was interesting to me. 3-point shooting was my first one. I completely agree there. I think the biggest thing with the 3-point shooting is just the more options. Like last year, it was just Quincy. And yes, sometimes Trey Green in practice was shooting the ball well, but he's also just a freshman. And you knew like he ideally didn't have a big role in the games necessarily. So I think it was just a totally different feel. Whereas this year, when they're shooting threes in practice, it's almost always a quality shooter taking that three. At least it feels that way. And they've got 4, 5 quality shooters in practice on a daily basis. And then there's some other guys like Jerome Hunter, Dalen Swain, who honestly, I feel like are shooting the ball pretty well, even if they're not known as shooters.
When Trey Green shoots the basketball, it's unlike anything I've ever seen in practice, in a game, whatever it might be. I mean, Steph Curry, sure, in the NBA, whatever. But in college, the amount of times that you sit there and you think, oh, no way this is going in. It's a fadeaway from the corner. It's a NBA 3 from the Cintas logo on the wing. It's, end of the shot clock. He's just got to heave something up. He missed 2 threes today, and we just kind of looked at each other and we said to ourselves, man, Trey, he missed 2. He missed 2 threes today.
Missed, yeah.
And we thought to ourselves,
is he sick?
What's going on with Trey? But that speaks to the level, again, how many minutes Trey gets with his size and what he's able to do defensively and everything.
But that's going to be a really interesting storyline, I think, because he does shoot the ball so well. I mean, it's elite level shooting. And I know that word gets thrown around way too often, but he truly is about as good as I've ever seen in a practice setting. And we've even seen him do it in a game setting some last year. I mean, he certainly had his moments. So I'm anxious to see that. The other thing that I had in terms of improvements was just the experience of the roster leading to a faster practice, like we kind of already talked about. I don't think we need to dive into that more, but those were the 2 standout things that I had. What about the most interesting position battles right now? Because we sort of talked about this with Baum when we were doing our preview before practice started. I would say it's changed a little bit. It's not exactly how I expected it to be.
Yeah, I would say so. Do you want to do this by naming the starting lineup, or how do you want to do this? You want to just
however you want. Like what when you think about the roster right now, are there any position battles that stand out to you, or do you think there are any battles? Do you think it's already fleshed out?
I think it's settling in. I'm interested to see as we kind of get into like the Wake Forest game and then towards Fort Myers, where Marcus Foster is, whether it's in the starting lineup or first off the bench, or I think he's going to find himself in a starting role. I really do. I think he's that good, and I think he's that important size wise to this team, especially now without Lassina. So I think maybe it's not a battle necessarily like between him and Jerome or between him and Dalen, but I think him navigating his way into a starting role, I think, is the most interesting thing for me right now. I'm very curious to see Dante and what Dante brings, because I think Dante Maddox, maybe him and Trey are battling for a lot of the same minutes. And I think Dante obviously physically brings a lot more to the table, length, size, everything like that. But man, Trey can shoot the ball, Rick. Trey can really shoot the ball.
So you're hitting on 2. I mean, the first 2 that come to mind for me would be the obviously we'll start with the big men, because that's still a focus. I mean, now I know Lassina Traore is out, and it makes it pretty obvious in terms of you need both the big men to play. I don't think there's a lot of battling going on, but I don't know if it's clear in terms of like, who do they really want starting right now between Zach and John Hughley and whoever else might be in that mix, and who are they most confident in certain situations. There's a lot to be figured out with how they're going to play out the front court minutes. And then with that, Foster and Swain, to me, was a really interesting battle for the first few weeks of practice. Like, I thought, man, how are you going to maybe only start one of those guys, or potentially even none of those guys? Like, if you're going to play the 3 guards and then go Zach Freemantle and Lassina Traore at the 4 and 5, you could potentially play neither one of those 2 wings. Well, we've gotten far enough into practice. I think, at least to me, it seems obvious one of those guys is definitely going to start. And with Lassina going out, I think now you can probably play both of those guys together a lot and maybe start them together even. So I don't know if there's so much a battle there, but they've been fun to watch when they do go at it in practice, because they've both been playing well, in my opinion. I think they're both really talented.
Yeah, so I just wrote it down while you were talking there. Do you want to do a starting lineup? And I'm realizing maybe Zach, and it's hard not to start Zach, but it's also hard for me with his size not to start John either.
Interesting. Yeah, well, like, here's the thing about this. We have, I don't think it's any secret to people that Zach Freemantle isn't always the best preseason practice player. He's been suspended from the team, Sean's first year when he got here during this time of year. And I think it was kind of related to not taking care of business the way he's supposed to. So I think that's always a never-ending battle with Zach. And you're kind of in that same spot this year of how reliable is he right now? Is he hasn't blown us away is what I would put in practice, and that's always the case with Zach this time of year. So it doesn't mean there's anything wrong there. It just are they we should start him and play him a ton of minutes right now? Or do they feel like he still needs to work his way back more, I guess would be my question. And so I really don't know what they're going to do with the starter minutes at the 5. I don't know who's kind of going to play more minutes early on. I think Zach is clearly the better talent right now, but it could go a lot of different ways early in the season in terms of these roles.
All right. So I don't know, but I'm going to guess. Here would be my starting lineup right now.
Yeah, give me 5.
This kind of seems a little wild when I write it down, but just kind of thinking it through in my head. Here's what I'd say. Davion at the 1. I'd say Ryan Conwell at the 2. Then I would go Dalen, Marcus, and Zach.
Yeah, that's my exact starting lineup right now. I feel I feel pretty confident in that right now.
Oh, you know what? I feel really confident in that right now too.
Okay, that's where to me that's almost how I feel like you have to play now that Lassina is out.
Yeah.
If he was still in there, then there's a lot of questions. I think you can go a lot of different ways with that. But now that he's not there, again, I think you have to stagger the 2 centers. And to me, Marcus Foster and Dalen Swain are clearly 2 of your best players. And in terms of what you need now, rebounding, toughness, some defense, physicality inside, Marcus Foster brings all those things as much as anybody on the roster aside from Lassina Traore. So yeah, I'm right there with you in terms of that lineup. I think that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned too, the third, I'm kind of labeling it that third guard minutes between Maddox and Green. I think that's a legit thing. Before we started practice, I thought maybe it was going to be more like Maddox is in the starting lineup and he's the third guard in that starting lineup. And now we just laid out our starting lineup. I feel like the wings have slid in there. So you're going to start that third guard on the bench. And I'm almost wondering, is Trey Green going to find his way in that mix because he does shoot the ball so darn well?
I mean, there are going to be times where you can't keep Trey off the floor simply because the ball is going to go in the net so many times. I mean, it is crazy what he can do shooting the ball. And I don't know if maybe I'm just not really remembering last year from practice or how much better he got in the offseason shooting, because he was already a great shooter. But good Lord, Rick.
It's different. And one of the things is confidence as a shooter, right? You can be a really good shooter, but it's different when you're a really good shooter who has your confidence level really high. Last year, I think there was so much else going on for Trey, trying to figure out man, why do I get told I'm doing it wrong every time on the defensive end? Why can't I get anything else right? That it probably took away some of that confidence on a possession-to-possession basis in practice on the offensive end. This year, I think, he still knows he needs to improve those other things. He's getting better at them. But in terms of his offensive skill set, he's fully confident in that, and he's letting it fly with plenty of confidence. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of the position battles that I would note. Again, you go to the wing with those guys, you're probably going to have to play both of them a lot. You go to the third guard minutes, again, probably both of them are in your plans to some extent. And then we'll still focus on that center spot. I think Jerome Hunter kind of becomes the wild card there, depending on how many minutes he might play. What about a most pleasant surprise for you? Is there a guy that's really caught you by surprise in terms of being better than you might have thought?
Maybe not better than I might have thought, but Ryan Conwell living up to the expectations that we had for him,
because they were so lofty, right?
Because they were lofty. And I was at a bar for dinner tonight, and I had a Cincinnati fan come up and ask me about Ryan Conwell, and I was telling him the same thing. I said, "Man, he's just been so good," and I just said it's really fun to watch him shoot the ball every day. And he kind of looked at me, and he's a good friend of mine. And he said, man, I really wanted him, and I was kind of sitting there and I was thinking to myself after we walked away, and I just said, man, to give such a simple comment where he just asks me and he says, how's Ryan Conwell looking? And I say, yeah, he's living up to expectations. He's shooting the ball really well, and just leave it at that. And then to think to myself as I walked away, yeah, every single day where you watch him play as well as he does, and kind of like Trey, where he shoots and you feel like it's going in. And I think back to your comment about Quincy from our last segment, where when Quincy took a shot last year, you were confident that ball was going in practice, right? You were confident in that. But you didn't have anybody else really on that team last year where you were confident. Davion became a reliable shooter at the end of the year, but he wasn't Quincy, right?
Yeah,
I think I think looking at what we thought Conwell was going to be and what he has been, he's a talent. He's really special.
Well, and it's awesome because he's fun to watch too. So it's like,
he's the best player.
He's going to be a really good player, but he is entertaining and fun, and the style, it fits in with what Xavier wants to do. There's a lot of things to like about that situation. And even going back to Quincy, who was fantastic for Xavier last year. I can't even imagine what last year's season looks like if you don't have a guy who played as well as Quincy did throughout the year, especially in Big East play. This time of the year last year, people were really questioning Quincy, including us, I think, even just comments by the coaching staff. I don't think they had any idea what Quincy was about to do the rest of the season in terms of leading the Big East in scoring. I don't think anyone had him pegged for that within the program or outside of it. So, that it's pretty exciting to see what Ryan Conwell is doing is the point. It's just like, he's so far ahead of even a guy like Sule or Quincy in terms of these one-year transfer guys at this same time. The confidence level in him is just through the roof, I would have to think.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. We'll wrap it up with this in terms of the preseason practice thoughts. Are there any other like standout moments or just guys that we haven't talked about that you want to shout out here?
I don't think so. I think we covered all the main points. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we did. I mean, I guess the last question I would have for you would be, what kind of conditioning shape do you feel like John Hughley is in right now? In the sense of, he lost all the weight, right? Which is great. He looks phenomenal. If you saw the transformation pictures from the podcast, he looks like an entirely different person than he did on June 3rd.
Yeah.
But as far as just conditioning and getting up and down the court, it's a little hard for me to tell, because when they play 5-on-5 or they're playing an inter-squad scrimmage, whatever it might be, he's got to pretty much be on the floor the whole time because it's 5-on-5. You're just, that's how you're going. But when everybody's sitting on the same bench and you're playing Dayton, and he doesn't have to play however long he's playing in a full practice, I'll be interested to see his actual physical conditioning shape.
Yeah, I think the question is, it's not like, can he get through the game or can he give you 20 minutes? Of course he can. Like, he's practicing longer than that every day right now. The question is, how much does his effectiveness wear off per minute that he's on the court? Like, I think he can come in and maybe give you something in the post and really like bury a guy with a duck in, put some foul pressure on them, get a quick foul on the other team or two. But as he's still sprinting the length of the floor and ducking that guy in hard on the fifth or sixth possession, can he do it for 5 straight minutes? Those are more the questions I would have about him right now. And I would tell you, I have questions. I mean, I'm not super confident that he's going to be able to give you starter-like minutes at this point in terms of quality minutes. He's foul trouble for him is going to be a concern. And then just general effectiveness starting to wear off the longer he stays on the court would be my big concerns.
Yep.
All right. Musketeer Madness, I mentioned at the top of the show, it's going to be tomorrow night as we're recording this, especially with a public exhibition so close following it. I feel like there's less I'm worried about or interested in seeing in this Musketeer Madness, but it is an opportunity to see everyone. Like, that's the thing about Musketeer Madness. Everyone's going to play minutes. Everyone's going to be on the court. Is there anything that you're most looking forward to there, or that you would tell fans to keep an eye out for here at Musketeer Madness?
Outside of the Joseph Otto Group ball toss, I don't really have always a ton. No, always a hit. I don't really have a ton that I'm looking for tomorrow. Really, maybe except playing in front of a crowd, I guess, for the first time. Like, does anybody get a little extra juice from finally playing in front of people? Maybe. I mean, that's not even really anything.
On the count of 3, you tell me the guy who you think is most likely to get a bump from that. On the count of 3, we'll both do it, okay?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1.
Dante Maddox.
Okay, so that's exactly why I want to do that, because I think everyone who's watching it feels like there might be something more than what we've seen from this guy, because sometimes when the lights turn on and they start going up and down, it's like he didn't have a great practice, but man, he makes some plays and he's just big and physical and athletic for a guard.
That's years of podcasting together at their finest.
Great bit
everything
right there, right?
everything we've done has culminated to that moment right there.
We've never talked about that either. That's something that we've never talked about yet.
No. Really, no. Honestly, if you were to say what's something to look for, I would say Dante Maddox. That's quite literally the only thing, because we've already seen the guys that played last year. I'm not worried at all about Ryan Conwell. I've seen enough of Hughley not to worry about what's going to happen to him in front of a crowd when he's played in the ACC and the Big 12. Let me see what Dante Maddox brings to the table.
Yep. And then that goes double for the Dayton exhibition. I guess the biggest question that everyone wants to know right now about this game, or this exhibition, I should say, is how do you think they'll play it? How real game-like will this be? Or how much is it going to be a quote-unquote work-on-stuff situation where they're like playing different defenses and running different lineups in and out of the game? What is your expectation?
Let me make this abundantly clear. Xavier wants to leave that game with more points than Dayton does. I don't think that can be understated. Now, in the same breath, are they going to treat this like a game that's happening on February 23rd, and they're not going to work in lineups and rotations? Obviously, they're going to do that. It's an exhibition. That's exactly what they're there to do. They're going to play everybody. They're going to give everybody an opportunity to go out there and make a statement in the first live action of the season against another team. But something that you and I brought up today at practice when we were sitting there having this discussion to ourselves was, as a Xavier fan on Sunday night at about 8:30, what is your reaction if Xavier loses this game? Because if they win the game, it won't matter who they played. Xavier, it'll be the same reaction. I think Xavier will win this game. If they lose the game, what does the loss look like? Is it tied with 5 minutes to go and Xavier leaves their best 5 on the floor and loses on an away floor? Or are they down by 8 with 5 minutes to go and they sub through 2 more rotations of lineups, they lose by 12, and they say, hey, we'll see you down the line?
Yeah. Has totally different feels. And it's like funny that I almost think fans would feel better about a blowout loss than they would if it was really competitive, felt like a real game, and they lost on a buzzer beater or something. You can't cancel out the latter as like, well, no one cared, it was just an exhibition game. It's like, well, no, that's not how it played out, right?
If it's 68-68 with 5 minutes to go and Ryan Conwell has 26 points and it's competitive, and at the under 4, Sean's losing his mind, and the Dayton fans were, 14,000 people are on their feet, and it's got the intensity of a regular season game, which I fully anticipate that it will. That's why, to me, just simply as a coaching staff, and if you listen to Sean talk, Sean loves this game. I mean, Sean, I know Xavier and Dayton don't play each other anymore, but Sean can't say enough about how much he loves going to play in this kind of a game at Dayton, in the sense of he knows, he appreciates the history, he understands what this game means to Dayton fans and how much they hate Xavier. And I think as this game goes on, I'm going to be real interested to see, like I said, late in the second half, where this all is.
Yeah. So like, that's the thing to me that tells you how they're going to play it. This is a public exhibition. It's going to be televised. Meaning they're not even like keeping this away from opposing teams that want to scout it. It's all going to be on film. It's going to be out there. I can't see Xavier being willing to go to do all that and then go up here and be like, yeah, we're okay if we get beat by 15. I'm not saying they're going to, like you said it perfectly. It's not the Big East tournament, but it's also not, you're going to play Kentucky Wesleyan in a meaningless exhibition in front of some fans at the Cintas Center. It's very different from that, in my opinion. And I'm sure before the game, both coaches are going to be like, it's just an exhibition. We're going to work on things. Or, no, they're going to tell you it's important. We want to win. We're going to play to win, that type of thing. And then after the game's over, they're both going to be like, well, it was just an exhibition. We're working on things. It doesn't mean a whole lot. We've got a lot of work to do, that type of thing. But we both know the fan bases will not feel that way. The fan bases are going to take it more seriously than that. The coaching staffs and the administrations who agreed to this are well aware of that fact. And so I just can't imagine Xavier goes up to Dayton without putting their mouthpieces in and realizing, like, we're here for a game. I mean, it's an exhibition, but it's real to some extent too. And in my opinion, you get a lot out of that. Like, normally you don't get to play a game that feels so real before you even start against real competition. This time you get, I mean, Dayton's a quality matchup for you. It's not like playing a bye game even. You know, this is a legit contest. So I think the coaches are really going to use that.
I agree. Fully agree.
All right, couple final things to wrap it up here, Paul. Preseason polls came out this week. Xavier 28th in the AP poll, 30th in Ken Palm's preseason projections, 37th in Bart Torvik's preseason projections, 26th in Evan Maya's preseason projections. So Evan Maya looking most favorably upon the Musketeers. Your take on any of those surprising you where they're at? Do you think they'd be higher, lower?
With Lassina, I would have said that I was surprised that they were lower. And now the funny thing is they probably all factor it, like the computer rankings probably all factored him in anyway. They haven't factored in an injury. So I would say, though, with Lassina, I was confident 2 weeks ago that at some point in this season that this was going to be a team that would challenge for a top 10 ranking at some point in the season. I really truthfully did. Now that goes back to the discussion we had of how much does he lower the ceiling. It's hard for me on one hand to say that with Lassina they would challenge for a top 10 ranking, and then in the other hand say that losing him brings you from being number 11 to number 25. Like, that also doesn't really make a lot of sense in my mind.
Yeah, that seems like a lot.
That's way too much of a jump. So to me, it's just been trying to balance and figure out what is this team going to be here over the first few weeks of the season. But I still think that even without Lassina, I think this is a top 20 team eventually as they settle into things. But I think this preseason stuff, I know everybody always hates on the AP poll. There's really not a ton to read into it, but AP, Ken Palm, that like 25 to 30 range, I think is probably pretty right for the preseason.
Yep. All right. Finally, the All-In docuseries. It was announced on Thursday, I believe, as we're recording this, came out. First of all, tell us a little bit about what you guys are trying to do with this, and then also how difficult was it to get this agreed to? Because that's what I think most people are probably interested in, is like, how much work did you guys have to do to get a Sean Miller? Yes. How much work did you do to have to get like approvals from Xavier and all that stuff? This seems like a big undertaking.
We actually didn't have to do anything to get Sean Miller's approval because this was his idea.
Ooh.
He came to us with this idea in the last week of May, and I'm not sure at the time if the idea necessarily was all that it is now turned into. But I think at the time it was, Sean is such a big football guy. I mean, if you've listened to the podcast, if you've listened to press conferences, if you've talked to Sean at all, he loves the NFL. He loves the Pittsburgh Steelers, who kind of do a version of this on their own. And I think there's a world where he watched Hard Knocks and he watched the Steelers version of their kind of behind the scenes thing. And he kind of just said, hey, it'd be cool if we did something like this. And I won't really go into all the details. We kind of have like a tell-all episode thing that we're going to do with Sean here coming out in a couple of weeks, so on the podcast. So I don't need to like rehash everything. But for this, since this is as of the day here that we announced this, I will say that doing this has been really cool because it evolved very quickly. I mean, he basically said, if you guys can come to the first meeting back in the first week of June, we set up the cameras, we shot everything, we started shooting all the practices, and then we realized we had so much good content, so much good footage and everything that it turned into now what it has become. And honestly, the biggest thing for us has been, and I'm a little shocked by it, that we kept it under wraps for this long, just because nobody really knew about it. But, you know, you have 30, 40 people in the gym every day at practice, whether it's, you know, players, staff, managers, whoever it is. Not saying I don't.
You guys had the cover of you're already working on stuff with the program. So I think everyone just thought it was like auxiliary to that. We were like, yeah, I mean, you guys are just filming more, but you already told us you were going to be doing something along those lines. So I don't think anyone got too suspicious of like, why you were there more often and filming more often. You know what I mean?
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. But yeah, I mean, as far as there are definitely things that we had to, when you asked the question of how difficult all of this was, I think Xavier loved the idea as far as promoting the program.
But but we're talking so the good stuff, right? Like when we see those great sound bites from Sean, is like everyone on board with you guys just putting that stuff out there? Is there a lot of back and forth on those decisions? And is there any apprehension about hey, I'm not sure if we're willing to let you guys just do a whole docuseries about this stuff with such access?
No, I think that's a great question. I guess when you say it like that, I think we have gotten to know Sean so well now over the last year and a half that we have a pretty good feel even before we show him something. Even before we showed him the first draft of episode 1, which is basically done at this point, covering the preseason. Even before we showed him the first draft of this, a few weeks ago, whenever it was, we kind of already had a feel that, hey, he probably won't like if we put this in, but he'll probably love if we put this storyline in, or if we cut this scene out, or if we put this scene in. I think what took some getting used to was the cameras always being rolling. I think at the beginning it was, what are these guys doing? And like I said, nobody really knew what we were doing. Even the players to an extent, they kind of knew that we were covering more and we were doing more footage, but I think not everybody really knew. And there was a point where we had to start interviewing the players actually in documentary style, where that we would maybe catch somebody after practice for 5 minutes, we'd mic them up and we'd have them come sit down. And
your classic confessional interview from
exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And at that point, when we brought those guys in to do that, Josh had basically cut the trailer already. We've made some edits, like I said, but it was enough to get an idea. So as we brought the guys in one by one, I kept playing the trailer for them, and you could kind of see the light bulb moment of, oh, okay, that's why these guys are around. That's what these guys are doing. And everybody loved it. And I mean, all the credit in the world to our guy, Josh, because as we've said a million times between ourselves, it's, you watch Hard Knocks on TV and the credits are a team 10 times the size of ours just for audio.
Yeah.
And we have myself, we have Baum, and we have Josh. The three of us have shot everything. The three of us have done, this entire project, and Josh has edited the whole thing.
Baum's eating citrus while you two are there working is what's really
that's right. That's right. Well, I'm drinking water. Yeah. But really at the end of the day, the buy-in for them to understand what this can do for them and for the program and exposure. And, other programs, it was funny reading the reaction today from, John Rothstein's replies or Vance's replies or whatever. And, you could see some people saying oh, this isn't so unique. And yeah, other teams have tried to do behind the scenes things, but this is a true 44-minute documentary following the team. We have been at every practice. We have been at pretty much all except for, I think, one full team off the court gathering. I mean, we went to, as you saw in the opening clip, when the team went down, the whole team was there when Zach threw out that first pitch. So we were able to walk through the tunnel with Zach and get him walking onto the field to throw the first pitch. Those kinds of things, both on and off the court. This is not just an on the court, you're watching some practice footage. This is, let's get to know these guys. Let's get to know the players. Let's get to know the program. Sean is narrating this, and it's not a narration like we gave him a script. It's clips from the podcast. And that's where, this is never taking away, again, just to be abundantly clear, it's never taking away from something that, the team is doing, or, oh, he's distracted by a podcast.
Sure. They could have ran a better underneath out of bounds set against Dayton on Sunday, but Sean had to go into the recording booth and do a voiceover for you guys.
Yeah, and it's it's like the way we were able to weave questions into the podcast, knowing what kind of an answer he was going to give, to then be able to use the soundbite to go over a scene that we knew we had already built. It was all to us about managing our time, managing what we can do, and going forward with it. I mean, it's really cool. It'll go about the schedule's a little weird in the beginning, kind of just catching up to the start of the season. And like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of flesh it out, but it'll be on Fox 19. It's presented by TriHealth. It'll be on Fox 19 on Tuesday nights at 11:30. that one it'll be the same show that you see on YouTube, just without profanity. If you watch it on YouTube, it's not a crazy amount of profanity, but we didn't cut it out.
People wanted to know that. That was asked on the message board today. Yeah.
It's not a crazy amount, but we left a little.
I will say you guys have done a fantastic job with that, of giving enough realness of like real sound bites from Sean to where people get the feel for like the real Sean Miller. And it's not like over the top cussing or anything. That's not who he is at all. But it's cool that you give some of the real moments of like when he lets a curse word fly, because that's what college athletics is. And he's in the moment when he's got that emotion and passion going. He's one of the best at delivering those moments and speeches. So you guys have done a great job of choosing those spots, I think.
The last thing I would say to that point is that we dropped that trailer today, which introduced the show, kind of gave some background, what the show is, show some clips, everything like that. But we have a trailer coming out on Tuesday, which I think is even better. I believe it's Tuesday. We're going to drop it. And that is a much closer view as to what you're actually going to see, as far as Sean talking to the guys, being in a practice, being extremely energized. Sean asked us yesterday after practice, I think he watched it 4 times. He watched it. He kind of chuckled and he goes, yeah, hold on. Let me see that again. He watched it again. He watched it again. Then the coaching staff came over. They watched it. It really, it's awesome. I mean, I've watched it probably 18 times. And it's given me goosebumps every time. And it's cool. I saw somebody ask, how all access is this? Like I said, we have been at quite literally everything since the first time they met back in the first week of June. And, not everything is going to make it into 8 44-minute. You can't compress 9 months into 8 44-minute episodes. Could be 9, could be 10, depending on how the season goes. But it's a minimum of 8. I would say probably a maximum of 10.
Is there a certain day that it airs on, like the new episodes?
So the new episodes will always come out on a Tuesday, but we don't have a set schedule. It's kind of going to be a feel of the season. So there will be an episode. November 12th is the premiere. There will be one more episode between the premiere and the shootout. And then there will be an episode after the shootout before New Year's, another 1 or 2 in January, 1 or 2 in February, March, that way. But we kind of just want to make sure, instead of setting ourselves on a hard deadline, we wanted to let the storylines and everything play out. And we do know that it'll debut on Fox 19 at 11 after the 11 o'clock news on that Tuesday night. And it'll immediately then, as soon as it's done airing on Fox, it'll go on our YouTube page to be able to watch. So an episode would never drop unless they had to move us around for something. An episode will always drop on a Tuesday. So if you turn on Fox 19 on a Tuesday night and it's either showing our podcast or it's showing, an episode that's already been run, then it wouldn't be, it'd be, okay, next Tuesday a new show would come out, whatever it might be.
I got to say, I like pen pointing Fritschner right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, Paul has a pen in his hand that he's been like using to sort of.
Well, you gave me this outstanding card stock. Usually you email me an outline, and then today you typed out a full outline for us. So I've been taking notes on here. So
I feel like I've got my college professor is kind of like giving me some instruction here as I'm talking to you. It's been nice.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. The All-In docuseries is going to be fantastic. You guys do great work, but this is a ton of work. I know it's a lot going into it. So, one, good luck with all that, but also everybody out there watching it, enjoy it and realize that you're pretty lucky to be in a program that does stuff like this and is willing to give this type of access, because it's going to be something fairly unique and definitely cool. And because of that, you might be a little bit more busy. This year, you might not always be regularly on this podcast every single week. We'll talk about that as we go. We'll bring in other guests or something if we need to, but appreciate you doing this again, because it is such great insight.
Yeah. And I mean, to be totally transparent, that's why it's been basically impossible for me to, not that I've, there has been moments, but it's just been crazy since June with, then getting married and everything else. It's like, the summer up to this point has been crazy, and now finally getting this out there and getting settled into the season. And the rebound rundown's coming back too. Can't forget about that.
I'm ready for it. You tweeted out the music the other day. It got me fired up. It's like, man, I've told you before, I don't like intros. I don't like theme music. I just want to get right into a podcast. But hearing you launch that, it made me realize like there is a little connection to that song now, which I'd never, kind of gets
it's just a very quick. I thought the little beat kind of sounded like a basketball bouncing on a floor. It's not crazy.
You do it right.
It's only like yeah.
You don't have a long intro.
I'm adding Louisville into the mix this year. I took them out last year. I'm putting Louisville back into the mix this year.
That's a good call. Pat Kelsey, there's a lot of local interest in what he's going to do. Plus, just in general, it's a new coach. You got the Kentucky-Louisville thing going, both of them with new coaches. There's a lot going on. I think that's a good call.
Well, the first year I overloaded it. I had too many teams. I was like 8 or 9 teams I was trying to do. I couldn't do everybody the right way.
Clown ass Wright State in there.
Yeah, that's right. I had Wright State in there. And then I had last year, I cut it down to 4, and then there were a bunch of days where nobody played the night before, the night after, so I was scraping the bottom of the barrel, and so now I think we have a good mix. Throw Kentucky, UC, Xavier, NKU, Louisville. I think it'll be a good show this year, and you'll hopefully join me on Mondays and Tuesdays as well. On that
whenever you want, I'll be on there. And of course, if you're not subscribed to Musketeer Report, you got to check that out. The message board is rolling right now. Preseason lead up is always a good time of year, and we'll have more to come there. Obviously, Amari Bynum has just visited the Musketeers' official visit, so a little bit of a recruiting information coming here in the next week or so, I think, on that side of things. But yeah, Paul, I mean, we haven't talked much at all. What are your thoughts on the message board right now? This is a kind of a crazy time, isn't it? Like it's been as active as ever the last month or so. Like we've got people on there nonstop.
Yeah, I mean, I think between Nick Lewis committing, Jaden Forsyth committing, because I think it's fun that the high school thing hasn't totally taken a back seat. I mean, it's definitely not like the transfer portal in April and early May, but it is still active. It's still there, and
they're getting good players.
Yeah, the message board's been great. So
it's been active. I think the practice reports have been good for that. The addition of that
I think those going. Well, I sit there with you every day, and I still enjoy coming back and reading them and being like, maybe I missed something, or maybe you caught something that I didn't, or whatever it might be. So I think the message board's been great. I think that this season, I think the only thing I would say, and we are going to do our schedule preseason prediction show. So
yep, we'll do that before the first week, our sort of season preview show that we always do. We'll do the win-loss game where we pick every game on Xavier's schedule and give you a final record, a Big East record prediction, all of that stuff. That's always.
Are you going? You can't find your way into the Snow Globe next Saturday in South Bend?
Yeah, this is the funny thing, because this is not the first time that they've done a secret scrimmage against Notre Dame, and everyone's always like, "Oh, you'll have all the scoop because of snow," and it's like it's the exact opposite. Snow won't tell me anything because everyone knows it would be coming from him. So it's like I can't get anything from Snow in this situation. It's kind of unfortunate.
Brutal.
Yeah. But we'll figure it out. We'll get it done. We'll have plenty of information as we always do. And thank you to all you guys who have been active on the message board, because it's made this preseason fun. I think everyone's ready for the games to get going. So this week it'll be fun. We got Musketeer Madness tomorrow and then the Dayton game on Sunday. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Paul.
Dayton, Bally. And I was told it would be on ESPN Plus too. I haven't seen anything listed about that, but I've gotten a million questions. I just want to make sure I got that in, that it'll be on Bally locally. And I believe it'll have an audio only stream as well. I believe Byron and Joe are going up there to do it.
Yeah, they're doing radio is what I was told.
Byron and Joe will be there. Bally will have it. And also it's supposed to be on ESPN Plus for people that are out of town. Don't get back.
All of Dayton's games are on ESPN Plus through A10, right? So I would assume they're just going to do a typical broadcast for this. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I asked them, and they said that it was going to be on ESPN Plus. I'm just saying that usually when you go on the website and it says watch, it'll say everywhere, and right now it just says Bally Sports Ohio, but it should simul stream out there. Just to clear that up. All right, thanks.
All right, that's all we got. Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you.